In today's episode, I address a listener's question about the topic of hell. I thought I could do this briskly, but it turns out it took me a little longer to talk about it than a typical episode, but I hope that's okay. It's an important question, an important topic, and I hope you find it helpful. Stay tuned. Hello, friends. Pastor Tim Westermeyer here, Senior Pastor of St. Philip the Deacon in the western suburbs of Minneapolis. Good to be with you as always. I'm going to do something I've been talking about now for at least a few episodes, and that's address a question that we've received from a viewer or a listener. And I'm going to do that pretty quickly, actually. Before I do that, though, I just want to mention one thing. This episode is coming out this Friday. We're taping on Wednesday. And yesterday, Tuesday of this week, we had a retreat for our core staff here at St. Philip the Deacon. And I just want to say how grateful I am to work alongside and with such wonderful, talented, faithful people. If you are part of St. Philip the Deacon, if you are connected to some of our staff, please just take an opportunity in the next week or two to say thank you. They're an incredible team, and we are blessed here to have each and every one of them serving this church. So thank you to everyone who is on the staff here. All right. A few episodes ago, maybe more than a few episodes ago, I mentioned that I'd like to respond, as we did earlier in the life of this podcast, to some listener questions. So I have about 50 questions I've received, actually. I'm going to tell you right now, some of them would be really hard to address in the 5, 6, 7 minutes that we typically have in terms of lengths of these. Some of them I can begin to address in a preliminary way. And so I guess right at the start, I'll say, as always, if you have questions you'd like us to address or like me to address, please comment below or send them in, text me, email me, whatever. Today, though, I want to address one of the 50 or so that I have received that I think I can at least touch on briefly in one episode, and it's this. It's sort of the statement is Christians are Christians because they are afraid of hell. So sort of talk about that, Pastor Tim. Christians are Christians because they're afraid of hell. And so this gives me a chance to reflect, I guess, on a couple of different things, including, well, what is hell? What do we mean when we say that? And I want to talk about that as often through some trusted guides, mentors, and authors. But I'll begin by saying, are there Christians who are Christians because they believe in hell? I don't doubt that there are. And having said that, I would say that's a limited, shallow, I'm not trying to be pejorative, but it's a sad way to live your Christian faith, I would say. And I'll begin with this. Most of us know the Lord's Prayer, which is, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Where? On earth as it is in heaven. Whatever we mean by heaven, by the way. So that's maybe the presence of God eternally. And so if there are people who think, well, Christianity is only about getting to heaven, I think the Lord's Prayer corrects that by reminding us that being Christian is really about making God's kingdom, which is what Jesus preached and taught about all the time, a present reality here and now, right? So our job as Christians is, with God's help, to make heaven a visible reality where we live in our own lives, to bring heaven down to earth. And yes, I do believe that after we die, we will be, God help us, in the presence of God eternally, which is what we typically think of heaven. But I don't think we should live our Christian faith out, and I'm certainly not alone in saying this, from a posture of fear, right? That, oh, well, if I can live in a certain way, then I will be saved and I will go to heaven. All right. I hope that makes sense as a preliminary comment. And I want to mention now sort of helpful ways to reframe what we think of hell. I will tell you, if you read one book about this, I would commend C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce. If I've talked about this in the past, maybe we'll try to find a link to those episodes. I honestly can't remember if I have. I'm not going to recount the whole imaginary sort of narrative here. It's fictional, but it's his sort of thought experiment about, well, what is hell? And part of that is communicated in the preface to The Great Divorce, where Lewis says, there are only two kinds of people in the end: those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says in the end, thy will be done. All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. No soul that seriously and constantly desires joy will ever miss it. Those who seek find, those who knock. To those who knock, it is opened. So another way of saying that is that God loves us so much that if we say, God, I do not want to be in your presence for all eternity, God grants us that wish, right? So this, again, Lewis says it, there are only two kinds of people: those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, the language is thy, but it's my. God, honor my will. Let my will predominate. I don't want to receive your love. And again, the paradox is God loves us so much that God is not going to force us. So while we think of hell sort of in the cultural imagination as this place where God is punishing us, where we're sent into this great pit of fire or whatever, the truth is it's a place we choose to be ourselves, where we are separated from God, okay? I hope that makes sense. I began this thinking, well, yeah, we can cover this in about 5 or 6 minutes, and now it occurs to me maybe we need longer than that. Let me say a couple of other things. One other quote from Chesterton, and then a final one from C.S. Lewis. For Chesterton, this comes from Orthodoxy. And he, again, in a different kind of language, is effectively saying God will allow us to reject God's love if that's our ultimate wish, right? And here's what he says about a person who is again and again saying no to God. Then when this kindly world all round the man has been blackened out like a lie, when friends fade into ghosts and the foundations of the world fail, then when the man, believing in nothing and in no man, is alone in his own nightmare, then the great individualistic motto shall be written over him in avenging irony. The stars will be only dots in the blackness of his own brain. His mother's face will only be a sketch from his own insane pencil on the walls of his cell. But over his cell shall be written with dreadful truth, he believes in himself. So again, there's this, it's parallel to Lewis's quote in the sense that in the first quote from Lewis, it's, give me my will, God. I don't want to deal with your will. And here, again, in Chesterton's language, the person is choosing not to believe in God, but rather to believe in him or herself, which turns out to be a very narrow, this is the Christian perspective anyway, a very narrow, small place, versus the love of God, which is infinitely expansive and gracious and filled with joy, right? Which brings me to the final point here. Everything I'm trying to say here, excuse me, I'm not sure very well, reinforces the Christian belief that whatever else heaven is, it's eternal union with God. It's being in the presence of God, who is love. And that requires us to be humble enough to say, yes, God, I want some of that, right? I want my own will to be subject to your will. And as long as we're seeking God's love, God will always give it to us, right? And all of that is wrapped up in this, again, final quote from Lewis, which from a Christian perspective is that we chase happiness and joy and peace and contentment and fulfillment in this life all kinds of ways, and there are all kinds of false gods that we bow down to that do not satisfy, right? And so in the end, as Christians, we believe this, and this is from Lewis's Mere Christianity. It's a famous quote: God cannot give us a happiness and peace apart from himself because it is not there. There is no such thing. So I hope that's at least a provisional beginning conversation about this topic of hell and about whether we are Christians only because we want to avoid it. I sure hope not. I hope and pray that we're being driven in our Christian lives by a desire to follow God, to enter into God's love, and to share that love with all around us. And again, I'm glad you're here today. If you have questions for further episodes, please, please, please let me know. As always, thanks for being here. Be well, stay in touch, and God bless.